morning. Thank you so much. My name is Elias Valentin II, and I'm the chairman of the Greenville County Democratic Party. I want to welcome you on behalf of our entire leadership team to our February breakfast. We're so pleased to be celebrating Black History Month with President Biden and Vice President Harris occupying 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's a nice feeling to not react to nonsensical tweets in the morning and to be a witness to positive policies being voted on and enacted to begin building back better. We have a lot of great work to do. We have an amazing lineup today for our breakfast. But this morning, I want to start with a great read and a piece from Lonnie Bunch III, the director of the Smithsonian Institute. He is a groundbreaker in the historian community. He is the first African American to serve as the director of the Smithsonian Institute, and I am so glad I was able to learn about him and his story through my research for this breakfast. His piece reads, "No one has played a greater role in helping Americans know the Black past than Carter G. Woodson, the individual who created Negro History Week in Washington, D.C. in February 1926. Woodson was the second Black American to receive a PhD in history from Harvard, following W.E.B. Du Bois by a few years. To Woodson, the Black experience was too important simply to be left to a small group of academics. Woodson believed that his role was to use Black history and culture as a weapon in the struggle for racial uplifting. In 1916, Woodson had moved to DC and established the Association for the Study of Negro Life and Culture, an organization whose goal was to make Black history accessible to a wider audience. Woodson was a strange and driven man whose only passion was history, and he expected everyone to share his passion. This impatience led Woodson to create the Negro History Week in 1926 to ensure that school children be exposed to Black history. Woodson chose the second week of February in order to celebrate the birthday of Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. It is important to realize that Negro History Week was not born in a vacuum. The 1920s saw the rise in interest in African American culture that was represented by the Harlem Renaissance, where writers like Langston Hughes, Georgia Douglas Johnson, and Claude McKay wrote about the joys and the sorrows of Blackness. Musicians like Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Jimmy Lunsford captured the new rhythms of the cities, created in part by the thousands of Southern Blacks who migrated to urban city centers like Chicago. And our artists like Aaron Douglas, Richard Barth, and Louis Jones, who created images that celebrated Blackness and provided more positive images of the African American experience. Woodson hoped to build upon this creativity and further stimulate interest through Negro History Week. Woodson had two goals. One was to use history to prove to white America that Blacks had important roles in the creation of America and thereby deserved to be treated equally as citizens. In essence, Woodson, by celebrating heroic Black figures, be they inventors, entertainers, or soldiers, hoped to prove our worth. And by proving our worth, he believed that equality would soon follow. His other goal was to increase the visibility of Black life and history at a time when few newspapers, books, and universities took notice of the Black community, except to dwell on the negativity. Ultimately, Woodson believed Negro History Week, which became Black History Month in 1976, would be a vehicle for racial transformation forever. The question that faces us today is whether or not Black History Month is still relevant. Is it still a vehicle for change is the better question. Or has it simply become a more school assignment that has limited meaning for children? Has Black History Month become a time when television and the media stack their Black material? Or is it a useful concept whose goals have been achieved? After all, few, except the most ardent rednecks, could deny that the presence and importance of African Americans to American society Or as then my 14-year-old daughter, Sarah, put it, I see Colin Powell on TV every day. All of my friends, black and white, are immersed in black culture through music and television. And in America has changed drastically since 1926. It is not a time to retire Black History Month, as we have eliminated white and colored signs on drinking fountains. I will spare you the 3-hour lesson I gave to her. I would like to suggest that despite the profound change in race relations that has occurred in our lives, Carter G. Woodson's vision for Black history as a means of transformation and change is still quite relevant and quite useful. African American History Month, with a bit of tweaking, is still a beacon of change and hope that is still surely needed in this world today. The chains of slavery are gone, but we are all not free yet. The great diversity within the Black community needs the glue of the African American past to remind us of not just how far we have traveled, but lo, how far there is to go. And while there are many reasons and examples that I can point towards, let me raise 5 concerns or challenges that African Americans, and in fact, all Americans, face that Black history can help address. The challenge of forgetting. You can tell a great deal about a country and a people by what they deem important enough to remember, to create moments for, what they put in their museums, and what they celebrate. In Scandinavia, there are monuments to the Vikings as a symbol of freedom and the spirit of exploration. In Germany during the 1930s and 1940s, the Nazis celebrated their supposed Aryan supremacy through monument and song. While America traditionally revels in either Civil War battles or founding fathers, yet I would suggest that we learn even more about a country by what it chooses to forget, its mistakes, its disappointments, and its embarrassments. In some ways, African American History Month is a clarion call to remember, yet it is a call that is often unheeded. Let's take the example of one of the great unmentionable in American history, slavery. For nearly 250 years, for nearly 250 years, slavery not only existed, but it was one of the dominant forces in American life. Political clout and economic fortune depended on the labor of slaves. And the presence of this peculiar institution generated an array of books, publications, and stories that demonstrated how deeply it touched America. And while we can discuss this basic information, such as the fact that in 1860, 400 million Blacks were enslaved, and that a prime field hand cost $1,000, while a female with her childbearing capabilities brought $1,500. We find few moments to discuss the impact, legacy, and contemporary meaning of slavery. In 1988, the Smithsonian Institute opened an exhibition that included slavery, decided to survey 10,000 Americans. The result was fascinating. 92% of white respondents felt slavery had little meaning to them. These respondents often said, quote, "My family did not arrive until after the end of slavery," end quote. Even more disturbing was the fact that 79% of African Americans expressed no interest or some embarrassment about slavery. It is my hope that with greater focus and collaboration, Black History Month can stimulate discussions about a subject that both divides and embarrasses us. As a historian, I've always felt that slavery is an African American success story because we found ways to survive, to preserve our culture and our families. Slavery is also ripe with heroes, such as the slaves who ran away or rebelled, like Harriet Tubman or Denmark Vesey. But equally important are the forgotten slave fathers and mothers who raised family and kept a people alive. I'm not embarrassed by my slave ancestors. I'm in awe of their strength and their humanity. I would love to see the African American community rethink its connection to our slave past. I also think of something told to me by Mr. Johnson, who is a former sharecropper I interviewed in Georgetown, South Carolina. His quote was, "Though the slaves were bought, they were also brave. Though the slaves were sold, they were also strong." Mr. Birch goes on to talk about the challenges that we have preserving culture and why Black History Month is so important to be able to uplift it, whether we're looking at our museums, our archives, our libraries, We need to make sure that we're preserving the African American lived experience within our own families, within our own churches. A great example is when the National Museum at the American History mounted an exhibition about slavery. And when they had the conversations after that, the engagement that Dr. Birch saw was at a different place from that initial survey. He hoped that a renewed Black history can focus our attention on preserving the African American culture and how that plays out into society. It is a great piece, but one of the things that I really want to end with before we get to our dynamic program is the power of inspiration that he talks about. And he says, one thing has not changed. That is the need to draw inspiration and guidance from the past. And through that inspiration, people will find tools and paths that will help them live their lives. Who could not help but be inspired by Martin Luther King's oratory, commitment to racial justice, and ultimately his sacrifice, or the arguments of William and Ellen Craft, or Henry Box Brown, who used great guile to escape from slavery? Who could not draw substance from the creativity of Madam C.J. Walker, or the audacity and courage of prizefighter Jack Johnson? Who could not continue to fight in our struggle after listening to the mother of Emmett Till share her story of sadness and perseverance? I know that when life is tough, I take solace in the poetry of Paul Laurence Dunbar, Langston Hughes, Nikki Giovanni, or Gwendolyn Brooks. And I find comfort in the rhythms of Louis Armstrong, Sam Cooke, or Dinah Washington. And I draw inspiration from the anonymous slave who preserved so that I can live today and that culture can continue. He concludes by re-emphasizing that Black History Month continues to serve us well, in part because Woodsink's creation is as much about today as it is about a past. Experiencing Black History Month every year reminds us that history is not dead or distant from our lives. I want to just call attention to the great piece that I put out this month. It's called Representation Matters. I'm so blessed to have the speakers that we have here today, because both of the men and Dr. Bingham, the woman that's featured here, are examples of what it is like to see ourselves in spaces that we don't often see ourselves. And I'm so excited to get to our breakfast and hear the message from all of these people, because each of them has struggled in their own way to reach their own heights and has been a champion in their community. So I really encourage you to research Lonnie Birch III. Again, how many Black historians do we know? How many Black historians are featured on TV? I think of Michael Bestrage, Doris Kearns Goodwin. Those are the presidential historians that we think of. We need to change the face of that and start featuring people like Lonnie Birch III. I'd like to talk about our amazing lineup of calendar events for this month before we get to our speakers. We are so excited to continue the Second Thursday conversations. Laura Haight, our technology and communications director, has done a great job of packaging these replays. So she's going to release the link to Being a Black Man, which was our February conversation, which was extremely powerful. And we're really looking forward to our Women in Political Leadership. We're focusing on the city of Greenville, but how we can extrapolate that and build out to a larger community across that county. We're going to be joined by the Honorable Councilwoman Lillian Brock Flemming, the Honorable Councilwoman Dorothy Dow, and former city councilors, the Honorable Jill Littlejohn Bostick and the Honorable Diane Smock. Our breakfast is going to continue in March, and we're so excited to have Adrienne Atkinson come and speak as a representative from NCNW, who is doing tremendous work in the community. And I'm so excited to bring in Ann Warner from Wren, who has been on the fighting lines with the crazy state senate that we have. She is a wealth of knowledge, someone that I admire tremendously, and is someone that's going to bring a great message to us. We're restoring our Democrats' care. In March, we're focusing on Meals on Wheels and partnering in the community. Big shout out to Whitney Wright, who's done a tremendous job in wearing multiple hats and just being a great leader in our Democratic Party. We also did a great job celebrating our community in Greenville through our Black History Month activities. We're going to reinvigorate that with Women's History Month next month. So please send your ideas, your activities, and your thoughts to our team. Lastly, I want to give a shout out to our mobilization committee and its coordinator, Stacey Mills. The last Wednesday of every month at 7, we're getting together to talk about ways to volunteer, ways to get plugged in, and things that we can do to continue to move the Democratic needle forward. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for the day. Our guest speaker is the NAACP President, Reverend J.M. Flemming. Reverend J.M. Flemming has served as president of the Greenville chapter of the NAACP since 2013. Reverend Flemming has worked diligently to bring all Greenville County law enforcement and elected officials together to have productive meetings to work on policing and community relationship. He leads by example. He has led partnerships with organizations to do voter outreach, voter registration, and voter education. He's hosted community forums, employment, transition workshops, school expulsion hearings, and has guided parents with issues working with his wonderful wife in Greenville County. But really, as the NAACP president, he has really set himself apart. This past election cycle, the local Greenville chapter was chosen amongst a small handful of chapters and given a grant to help with voter engagement efforts. They provided comfort to people waiting on long lines with smiles, with food and drinks, and some laughs and joy to excited voters that were voting during the 2020 general election. And I want to let you know that made a difference. And it was such a pleasure to watch when I would go and just see the way that the NAACP members, all their representatives would interact. It was truly, truly community service at work. So it's my great honor to introduce the esteemed community leader and president of our Greenville NAACP chapter, Reverend J.M. Flemming.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. For a little while, I want to hold your mind hostage. And for a little while, I want to enslave your thoughts just for a little while. The backdrop of this conversation will begin about a man who was born into slavery during the second century of slavery, around 1840, 1848. He was born into slavery, but slavery was not born into him. He broke the law of slavery when he taught himself to read. He freed himself in his early 20s. And later, he became one of the most prolific orators of the 20th century, bar none, black or white. During one of his speaking engagement in mixed company, he said that the black man will never be free until he's able to vote. This statement caused me to examine, go back and to read 3 amendments to the Constitution, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. The 13th Amendment ratified prohibited chattel slavery. There were things worse than to enslave a man's body with chains, shackles, and whips. The worst thing was to enslave a man's mind. The 14th Amendment, when ratified, defines citizenship in the United States. All persons born, naturalized, or even those born as a slave. The 15th Amendment was passed in Congress on February the 26th, 1869, and ratified February the 3rd, 1870. The 15th Amendment guaranteed African men the right to vote. I want to put a pin here for a moment and ask the question. So why is it then that every 25 years in the United States, the Congress has to vote to give Black people, no other ethnic group, just Black people, the right to vote. 151 years later, after the 15th Amendment had been ratified, Blacks are still fighting for the right to vote. I want to pause here for another question. Are we free or are we held hostage? Isn't it strange that in the last few weeks, Republican legislators in 33 states have moved to restrict voting rights for Blacks and people of color in this country? Are we free or are we held hostage? Blacks in America hold fast to the hopes, the dreams, and aspirations of our forefathers whom were enslaved in this country. We've had the amendments. We hope that America would live out the true meaning of a constitution and her creeds. One says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So again, why are Black people and people of color not protected by the Constitution and its amendment? Are we free or are we held hostage? Black history predates antiquity. Black history is the oldest history of humankind. Look in retrospect and through the lens of history, Blacks have not always been in slavery. We are descendants of Black kings, queens, and potentates. We are descendants of mathematicians, physicians, scientists, astronomers, psychologists, agriculture, just to name a few. We're inventors, eyeglasses, shoes, metalcraft, weaving, just to name a few, and the Rubik's Cube. In the last 5,000 years, the oldest white scholars gained knowledge and education from the people of the now. Enlightenment will overcome ignorance. America must become a melting pot for multiculturalism and governance. Together, we can promote equality, equal and equality. We must overcome these barriers that separate us, that hold us back, keep us from being a people and a country of oneness. We must acknowledge the deep-seated racism in our politics, in our religion, in our education, in our system of government, economics, institution. This is one of the reasons that America is struggling with race and racism. The failure of America is her willingness to confront racism, bigotry, hatred. This has been our problem. We have not confronted it in a meaningful and truthful way. We must be willing to engage conversation about race, racism, and our culture. We must learn to celebrate our racial differences, enforce honor and our community. Together, we must embrace new bold visions of race equality. This is the only path to healing of a nation that is divided. Are we free or are we held hostage? For more than 112 years, the NAACP has followed and has fought for equality for all people and the right of mankind. We met in Niagara Falls, Canada, blacks, 48 non-blacks, 112 years ago in Canada because we couldn't meet together here in America. We're asking now that all of our communities, all of our citizens would join with the NAACP and continue our fight and our struggle for one humanity, for one society, for one community. Thank you so very kindly.
Thank you, Reverend Flemming, very much. I just actually got a message on the chat. You're getting rave reviews. Your message is always so clear. You're very dynamic and you speak from the heart. And one of the things that in bringing you here, sir, I know you do a great job of keeping your organization nonpartisan. But there are ways that we as individuals, not necessarily Democrats, that we can continue to support the work that you do. Can you share with us some of those ways that we can get behind you and continue to uplift the work that you've been doing before I've been here? So
well, one of the things that we can do is that we need to bring the whole community together. We need to involve and get engaged with white males in our community that would help bring about the changes that is needed. We are afraid to have conversation about race and racism, and we can never overcome the challenges that's before us if we do not talk about race and racism and the challenges and the side effects of slavery. We must all come together, white and black. We don't allow folk to hide behind, I wasn't here. White folks say, I wasn't here, my grandparents didn't own slaves. No, you benefiting from the profits of slavery that was made off of the backs of black. So we all have a part and a role to play. So we invite everybody. We want every ethnicity that we have in our community to be part of our next forum to talk about race and racism and cultural divide.
And one thing I want to say is that you are very open, and I want the group to know, if you're not familiar with the NAACP, they're very inclusive. Everybody is welcome, no matter what your stripe is. Can you tell us when your meetings are, Reverend Flemming, so that I know you're doing stuff virtually, but if there's times and information that's coming up, we'd love to promote that and get involved.
All right, that's second Sunday. That's every second Sunday that we have at 4 o'clock. When we were meeting, we had open meeting. Excuse me. We had an open meeting at Tabernacle Baptist Church. My voice been to leave me. I say again, it was second Sunday at Tabernacle Baptist Church at 4 o'clock. And we have an executive meeting that's the fourth Thursday at 6 o'clock. We invite our community to come share with us, listen in to what we're trying to do. And we need everyone's help to get it done.
Well, thank you. And on a personal note, and really on behalf of the Democratic Party, I want to thank you for sharing the gift that is your wife.
She'll get a chance to promote us a little bit more.
But I know when you are in elective office, and you know this, it takes time away from other things. And I know how supportive you are and how much you guys champion each other. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because we would be in a very different place if we didn't have Miss Lillian. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm so excited to introduce someone that I have gotten to get to know over this past year, and as someone who I truly, truly hope we continue to see in elected leadership, but if not in political life, as someone that is a voice, a clear voice in the medical field. We've seen COVID hit us in a very unique way. The statewide leadership of South Carolina has let us down, not only in their response to COVID, but in their reaction. In Greenville alone, over 850 of our neighbors have passed away and have died. And that's only what's reported. We're starting to see the vaccination process ramp up. We're going to talk about the partnerships later on in our elected official, highlighting that some of the local uh, elected officials have taken upon themselves to make sure that vaccinations are clear, that there's spaces for all communities to have access to. But we're lucky today to have Dr. Dawn Bingham, who's going to talk to you about some truths, some myths, and answer some questions. Quick bio on Dr. Bingham. She is an OBGYN, a mother of four, a professor, and she is a community leader. She's been all about building healthy communities, one person at a time. She is our we're very proud that she was our candidate for the South Carolina Senate District 12. And like I said, hopefully we'll see her sometime soon in the State House or in another elected office. But it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Dawn Bingham to talk a little bit about COVID. Thank you, Dr. Bingham.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation to join you guys this morning. I actually had the opportunity to be at the State House recently because we've had so many interesting bills that came flooding out of the gate. And I had the opportunity to be testifying on a number of those and have found it very interesting to see what some of the priorities have been for our legislators, unfortunately. We've had so many other problems that needed to be addressed very quickly. So I was asked to come on and talk a little bit about COVID, and I wanted to bring up a slide that I've got on my phone. I won't be able to share it with you, but it was something that I had found in some of the research that I was doing, because I know that people have a lot of questions about COVID and probably a litany of them. But most recently, the thing that is on everybody's mind is about the vaccines and how to access them, which one to get, because I get that question a lot. And what each of those vaccines mean. And I think the biggest overall point is that I want you to have as a takeaway is that all of vaccines are very, very good, and they all work in a very similar way. The ones that are available to us now, you have heard about probably Moderna and Pfizer, and they have some little differences in them and how they have to be administered and the temperatures they have to be kept at. And that is not the important part. The important part, what I want you to hear, is what they did, because both of those tests were about 43,000 people. Of those people in the Pfizer group, about 8 people got sick who had gotten the vaccine, but 100% of the people who got sick, 100%, nobody went to the hospital. Nobody had disease, illness, and severity enough to go to the hospital, which is what we were going for in these vaccines, right? Because you can still get sick oftentimes with a vaccine. You may still get it, but it limits the severity of your disease so that you don't have to be hospitalized. So it's the same thing for the Moderna vaccine. The Moderna vaccine, 100% of the people who got that, 100%, nobody went to the hospital. And I want you to know that as the Johnson & Johnson comes out, which is the one-shot one now, as that vaccine comes out, that has also been tested on about 43,000 people. 100%. Okay, we've had 100% of the people who got the vaccine. Nobody went to the hospital. So this is the end. This is the end number I want you to hear. So when people start talking about what percentage of people got sick, which percentage of people had the placebo, what percentage of people may have gotten a case of it, 100% of the people who got vaccine, nobody went to the hospital. Nobody had disease, illness, and severity enough to go to the hospital. So when people say, should I get the vaccine or not? There are people that may have some reservations about it, but this is the information that I need you to understand, is that 100% of the people did not go to the hospital with it. And the way this vaccine is formulated across the board is that it takes mRNA pieces of the virus, not live virus, and it uses them in this vaccine. This is technology that has existed before and has been tested before. And actually, from my line of work with it, which is OBGYN, the American College of OBGYNs and the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine both support pregnant women getting this vaccine. You ask, why? Because it wasn't tested on those folks, right? Because we never put pregnant women in test trials, which is a whole other story, right? Because pregnant women need vaccines too. They need to be part of test trials. But why would you do this? Because the technology has already existed. And if you get COVID while you're pregnant, your disease severity is much, much worse. Okay, these people, when they go to the hospital, they get sick very quickly because they have even more diminished lung capacity than other people do because of the way the gestation happens and the way it pushes on your lungs. So those people, and we actually end up delivering those people sometimes so that we can give them back some of their lung capacity. So what I want you to understand about these vaccines is that they are very recommended by the societies for medicine, and that they are very useful in their utility in preventing disease severity. Now, I will stop for questions on that part before I start kind of moving on to access. If anybody has any questions, please just pop in and ask.
So, Dr. Bingham, I had one that was texted to me earlier by a friend that is very passionate about childcare.
Yeah.
What are your recommendations? And I know no one's going to take it to the bank and be like, Dr. Bingham told me, but what would you say for people with children? How do they get information or access to the studies that are starting to be done on children? Because I know they were delayed. We start on adults, which makes sense, and then we kind of children. So can you explain that a little bit?
So studies for children that are going on, probably the best source for information is going to be through the CDC or through the American Academy of Pediatrics. There are some that are being started on children, so that we can have that information and actually have data to go on. But what we know is that children in general, although they may be carriers of this, usually have much more robust immune systems and seem to not carry on with severe disease. That's one of the things we know. But we do know that they can spread the illness, which is a big concern for people who are their caretakers, who are their teachers, right? Because we know across the board that although it's people who are usually 65 and older who are dying from this disease, we also know that anybody in those other younger categories, which is, your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, 50s, can get this disease and have long-term sequelae, long-term chronic issues with this disease, whether it be anything from lung disease or whether it's from blood clotting. This disease can really affect people. And so I would say for the person who was asking about trying to get somebody information about how children can be vaccinated, I'd say look at those two sources.
Thank you. Anyone else can feel free to unmute themselves. If you have a question, please. This is why we brought Dr. Bingham on.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on. If you have another question, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Don, I just signed up this morning for on a link that led me to this thing called Dr. B, where you could sign up for notifications if any of the vaccine is left over at different sites that are in your area. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to, I mean, what are your thoughts on signing up for those programs? Because,
yeah, so right now,
part of me that feels bad that if I get it before somebody else. My 80-year-old parents in Florida felt guilty that they were getting shots before frontline workers, but it seems like using up those vaccines that are left over at the end of the day makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. So the issue with access is that we are doing it state by state and hospital system by hospital system, essentially. Obviously, a more coordinated federal response using supply chains that already existed would have made a lot more sense and would have made it so that I don't have teachers from South Carolina driving now to North Carolina to go get their vaccine, which is what's happening right now. So it has been very frustrating for people. But that being said, this is the situation that we're in. The states are getting their supplies, and literally each hospital system by hospital system is getting their supplies. And sometimes they're promised a certain amount, and they're rarely getting their actual allotment. They're usually getting some percentage of that. And so they're starting to learn from that experience, right? So they're starting to titrate down. Instead of making appointments for the allotment that they've asked for and been told they're going to get, they're doing it at 60%. So they're responding to what's actually happening to them. And that's happening in the Prisma system, that's happening in the MUSC system, that's happening in the Spartan regional system. So that being said, when you sign up in South Carolina through the VAM system, if you're part of one of those groups, that tiered group that can sign up, then you get registered to your vaccine, you get an appointment at a particular location. Once you signed up for that first dose, you are supposed to be guaranteed for your second dose, okay? Because we don't have the Johnson & Johnson one yet. So once you get that first dose, you should be signed up for that second dose. But again, that site is making assumptions about the number of people that are going to come based on their appointments. Well, if people don't show, or if somebody opens an extra vial, then they'll have extras, right? Nobody wants that to go to waste. So it makes really good sense actually to have an alert system. Now, once you get, if you're in that like little subgroup of people who signed up and get the last dose at the CVS, if it begins to show up there, and they've got 5 vaccines and you get it, at that point, there's an ethical obligation to make sure that you get that second one. So you should be able to get that second one and be in that queue permanently. You shouldn't have to do that mechanism again. Does that make sense?
Great question, Susan. Dr. Bingham, if you want to continue and move on to the next phase as well, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So what I was talking a little bit about was the access, and I had touched on that with the VAM system. One of the things I have found challenging about the VAM system, and I actually have an elderly parent in North Carolina, and they're using a totally different system. Both systems are super high tech in the sense of if you don't have access to a very good broadband support and the hardware to use that broadband support. If you don't have a cell phone that you're going to be able to receive your dual authentication, it's going to be very challenging for you to sell. And the folks that are on the margin and someone disenfranchised are really going to need help moving forward. And to that effort, Prisma has actually just come out with a mobile van site that they're going to go out into communities where we know this is a problem and get people signed up, and then understand that they'll be returning in 3 weeks, 4 weeks time to do those shots again for those people. But I think that is something to be very cognizant of. If you have neighbors or you have people in your life as we move through the tier system that have a difficult time using this this type of technology, it'll be challenging. The actual getting the shot is not challenging. I mean, it's very straightforward. What other kind of question can I answer?
Excuse me. Hey, Dr. Don, it's Laura.
Hey, Laura.
I have a question. Is there going to be some sort of mobile clinics or mobile vaccination sites in Greenville? Like, could they use like the bookmobile or the bloodmobile or something to get into communities where people are more likely to get a shot than to have to send them to one big central location, like we're doing now? Do you see anything happening like that?
So Prisma does have a couple of mobile van sites that they're going to be using to go out into more rural communities. But along the lines of your question about could we use things that already exist and sort of piggyback on top of them, the places that are already mobile that people can get to or can go to other people, I would say yes, because what we're learning about, in particular, the Pfizer vaccine, one of the drawbacks with that vaccine is that we thought it had to stay in a deep freeze. It could only come out for 6 hours before it had to be administered. And what they're actually finding now with more time on the ground and using it, it can actually be unfrozen for a lot longer than that and still be active. And so that's actually really good news. And I actually questioned the validity of that myself, because I was like, how do you move from 6 hours to over a week? Like that's what explain that to me. And so I went back and looked at the studies, and it's basically that they just did not have enough time to do those studies before they wanted to roll it out to people. And now just having more time on the ground, they had actually found it. So what that means is that you don't have to have these deep freezers. And that was actually one of the limiting factors by who was getting vaccines, because you had to have a special kind of deep freezer, which really only hospitals have for these kind of specimens. So it could only go to hospitals. Well, now we know it can go to anybody with a regular freezer. All right, well, let's have Chick-fil-A jump in. Let's have Walmart jump in. Let's have, other people with regular freezers who have a supply chain in place who might be willing to participate in this. So that conversation is happening now.
Great question, Laura. Lee Leering, I believe, asked a really good question, Dr. Bingham. She asked if I've heard if you've already had COVID that one shot is good enough. Is that the case? And I think maybe Dr. Don.
No, not necessarily. What we're recommending now, and this is just because we don't have the body of evidence yet to be able to say, what we're recommending is if you've had COVID, when your turn comes to get the shot, go ahead and get the full vaccination schedule, because we don't know how long those antibodies to COVID last. Yeah, and that's another good shot, another good question too, that kind of segues from that. If you get the shot and then you go to give blood and see if you've got antibodies, you may not have the same level of antibodies as somebody who got the shot because it's a different level of protection. Those tests yet, they're not perfect. So I would not bank on knowing whether or not you are actually protected on whether or not those antibodies. Those tests are not yet perfect. We just haven't had enough time for that. So yes to getting the shot even if you've had COVID.
Excellent. We have another question from Deborah, and Deborah asks, although you're supposed to take Tylenol after the shot, what will be the effect if it is taken before the shot? Would you need to take the shot over again?
No, Tylenol won't interfere with the shot. The Tylenol, just like any other shot, like a flu shot, like your body may have a reaction to it. It doesn't mean that you've gotten sick. The body is actually doing the work that it's supposed to do in processing this vaccination material. And so some people that means aches, some people that means chills. Tylenol just helps to ameliorate them.
And then we have another great question from John, and thank you for the great question, Deborah. John just wants to know, why does South Carolina have one of the highest rates of infection in the U.S.? What could be done about it? John, before Dr. Bingham jumps in, I think it's because we like to be on the top of everything list we should be on the bottom of, and on the bottom list of the top of. But Dr. Bingham is well more learned than I am, so I will defer to her.
I think that might actually been one of my campaign mantras, but at some point in time, I think that, all joking aside, maybe the master just decided we needed to be first at something. And it is unfortunate that in South Carolina per capita, we do have the highest infection rate. And despite the finagling of numbers that DHEC chose to do, you can't change those numbers. And the reason that that's the case is because we have not had good leadership from the top down, basically explaining to people the necessity of public health measures like social distancing and wearing masks. There have been number of things that have been tried that have been absolutely ludicrous from a public health standpoint, like the stickers for the restaurants and not limiting indoor gatherings. And so when you look at the public health measures that are tried and true decades and centuries old, when you have an infectious disease, particularly one that is a respiratory borne illness, you have to keep sick people or carriers away from well people. That's all there is to it. And then when you've got sick people and carriers, you have to take care of them in a capacity so that they're willing to quarantine, right? You have to provide for the fact that if they can't be in school, that you either give them some tuition assistance, you provide for their broadband access. If they can't work, you give them some type of a stipend while they can't work. Because if you tell somebody you might get other people sick and you might be able to feed your children, I know what people will do, right? You have to take care of your families. So you have to, and it's very straightforward. You keep people who are sick or carriers away from well people, and that helps us to decrease the spread of disease. And we just didn't acknowledge that from a political standpoint and a leadership capacity, and make sure that we have a mask mandate and really limit indoor gatherings. And when people, and if we had done that, we would be in a very different situation, because we know that that's the case. If you look at the numbers of cases in South Carolina versus literally other countries, South Carolina, our little state, compares worse to some other countries that have had these measures in place and just expect. And this is really, it's been very interesting from a philosophical standpoint, because it really has pointed out to me, who cares about their neighbors, who actually cares about their neighbors.
No, thank you, Dr. Bingham. There's a couple more questions. Anita LeBold asked, I know that there are people who refuse to get the vaccine. What is the percentage of the U.S. population that needs to get the vaccine that will kind of put us at that threshold to protect us all?
You were breaking up just a little bit. Could you repeat that?
No, absolutely. I'm sorry about that. What is the percentage of the U.S. population that we need to get the vaccine so that we can have that threshold, kind of that herd immunity threshold?
So all the numbers that have continued to be popped around is 70%. 70% of the population needs to get that vaccine so that we would have that, quote, herd immunity. And so if you look at the numbers for doing that, we're not going to be there by fall, folks.
Thank you for that. And then the last question that I have, do you think it's advisable right now for our state to be dropping the limitations for restaurants and bars? Do you think we're out of the woods? And I think you just kind of answered that with your last one.
No, I don't think that that's the case. I'm actually not sure why we would do that at this point in time. I think that if you don't have mask mandates in place and you're going to allow large indoor social gatherings and you don't have your population vaccinated, you are literally back in the same situation as you have been.
Well, Dr. Bingham, it's always such a joy to hear from you. Thank you for your leadership and thank you for your commitment to not only health, but women's health. I know you have been saying some amazing things on social media in opposition to what's happening in the Senate. So I just want to thank you for your leadership and keep running. We'll keep supporting you and we need you. So thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate the invitation to be here anytime.
Awesome.
And I'm going to pop off because I'm heading to my daughter's volleyball tournament. So
awesome. Take care. Tell her good luck.
Bye, y'all.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you, Laura.
One of the things that I'm truly a firm believer of is none of us can do anything alone. I'm very fortunate because I have the best first vice chair ever, and it's a team. But Ruth, nothing would happen without Ruth. But there are so many other components that we need to highlight. And one of the best partnerships that has been a true inspiration to me is the Democratic Black Caucus of Greenville County. And at this time, I just want to acknowledge them and shout them out because they have been doing the work. They are passionate and they are a group of committed individuals who is staying in the fight. And not only staying in the fight, they're ramping up their engagement because they know it's going to take time and it's going to take a lot of work to do it. So I just want to acknowledge first the chairman, Quadro Campbell, who's doing a phenomenal job. We are very fortunate to be joined by a couple of members of their team here. But I want to give a huge shout out to the first vice chairwoman, Ann Thompson, who is not able to join us. Also, one of our favorites, the second vice chairman, who doesn't love Javaris Howard? I mean, when you get around Javaris, like who doesn't smile? He's just the best. But we're joined by their secretary, and I gave her a shout out, not knowing she was on the call yet, but Whitney Wright, just a gem in our party, doing such great work. And I'm really proud that she's a part of our team.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anytime, Whit, anytime. We also have Tamisha Grant, who is not able to join us today, but she is a member of the executive committee team, and Paul Merlot, who really does a great job wearing multiple hats, and he is also a member of the board as an executive committee man. So get involved, stay in touch with what they're doing. Whitney, do you mind if I put you on the spot to share a few words?
Sure. Thank you for the heads up. I'm looking at my name on here, and I still have my work hat on, so I apologize for that. Again, I'm the secretary for the Democratic Black Caucus. We meet every third Thursday of the month. Right now, we're still virtual, and so our meetings are held on Zoom. We typically distribute an agenda as well as the link for anybody who would like to join the meeting in this format, like you see today. Or we broadcast live from Facebook if you'd just rather view the meeting instead. And then all of our recordings of previous meetings are online as well. So in the rest of 2021, you all can expect more forums with community leaders on specific issues that affect the Black community and how we can use legislature to make positive change. And then also in support of some of our Democratic candidates who will be running for office in 2021 and 2022. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. We are still registering voters, thanks to Ms. Ann's ongoing initiatives. And we're ready to go, though. Got to stay ready. You don't have to get ready.
Thank you, Whitney. They've been partnering on some great events with us. We are lucky as a Democratic Party because we have such great affiliate organizations. We don't run them. They run themselves, and they're very well run. Next week, we're going to be, next month, we're going to be featuring the Democratic Women Board as well in celebration of Women's History Month. So thank you, Whitney. Big shout out to Quadjo again. Really, as the leader, he's doing a great job. Before, and I'm so, y'all don't even know how excited I am. Those really close to me know how excited I am to introduce Reverend Mills. But before I do that, I want to give a shout out because I think I saw his face earlier. And if this is assumption that makes me look bad, I'll take it. But I think we are honored by having Reverend Speed on the call. And Reverend Speed is someone who brings joy to my life, who is always a partner and a true community servant. He gives us the space. He lets us have events there. So I'd be remiss if I didn't shout him out. Thank you for the work that you do. Your church is a beacon of hope. And you have amazing people like Whitney and Mr. Vitra, who I just love working with. So Reverend Speed, if you can hear me, thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for all that you do. You're amazing.
Yes, sir.
It is now my great honor. I'm really, really excited to introduce Reverend Stacey Mills, who is a graduate from USC Upstate in 2003. The Spartanburg County native taught at Woodmont High in Piedmont, South Carolina from 2004 to 2009 before returning to his alma mater to serve as the Assistant Director of Student Life. In 2015, he became the Interim Executive Director of USC Upstate's Greenville campus. The following year, he officially took the role, and if you have seen anything on that campus, it is just thriving, it is growing, and that's due to the great vision and work of the whole team at USC Upstate, but really because of Reverend Mills. They're combining working with the community and leading efforts to provide educational opportunities and quality programs for everyone throughout the region. Reverend Mills was also recently appointed to the Greenville Health Authority Board of Trustees. He is named Southern Regional Trustee for the National Board of the Urban League. He also serves as the chairman of the Urban League's board. In August, Reverend Mills was promoted to Assistant Vice Chancellor for Regional Engagement. He serves as the senior minister for Mountain View Baptist Church, a church with a rich history in Greenville and home to our very own Honorable Councilwoman Lillian Brock Flemming and so many others. Reverend Mills inspires me. When I hear him, I want to go and do work. He has such a lovely family, 2 beautiful children who are out there in the community being of service, and they will change the world. So it is my distinct honor, my very much pleasure to introduce our featured speaker for the month, Pastor Stacey Mills. I think we might be having a little bit of technical difficulty right now, but we're going to work that out.
Can you hear me, Eli?
Beautiful. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be with you and to share with you, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. I certainly give deference to all of the other pastors and to Reverend Flemming for his remarks earlier, and to all of the leaders of this party in our region. A purposeful read of James Weldon Johnson's now famous poem, set to music by his brother and recognized as the Negro National Anthem, one finds thematic movements that capture the anguish of a people just 35 years from slavery, gathering their dignity into a strength that would characterize their lives in a post-Reconstruction era that produced U.S. senators and representatives from the very states that once held their mothers and fathers in chains and fetters. No, the business of lifting is not new to us as a people, yet it must become a priority for this party which now has an opportunity to shed greater light on an unprecedented domestic assault on our democracy just 7 weeks ago in the very halls of the building that houses the work that makes the United States Constitution valid for all people. The lifting of justice, American democracy, and the dignity of every American, regardless of race, ethnicity, or any other social identity, will create the momentum needed to secure the victories to stabilize a country reeling from 4 years of a dangerous authoritarian leadership. Johnson's lifting produces images for this reader of a new day rising from the darkness of the night before it, a day filled with promise so powerful that we must sing. Here, though, in 2021, the lifting is a responsibility, a charge to us who have inherited a mantle, so to speak. That responsibility is to remind our leaders that there are still people who are disenfranchised, people who need access to affordable health care and quality housing, fair and equitable economic opportunities, people whose children have suffered setbacks in their education process due to a lack of internet access, and the reality that COVID-19 didn't just attack immune systems, but exacerbated and exposed the ills of social systems as well. Lifting is more than singing this song, but empowering others. Indeed, it is every voice, Latinx voices, Black voices, white voices, German American voices, every voice. Engage young voices, generations X, Y, and Z, and boomers together are powerful enough to set the course aright. The next few years will be a battle for democracy like we've never witnessed, from local governments, state committees on policy, to federal commissions. Lift every voice. It is our responsibility to clear the way for the next generations to inherit a sound and strong government of the people and by the people, and sing it again and again and again until the message is clear that all people matter, that every family has a right to climb the economic ladder out of poverty, that education is global and necessary for the advancement of all of us. Sing it again until our ancestors rest in peace, that the chains that brought them here, though now invisible, didn't choke their great-grandchildren or paralyze them from standing for what is right. Yes, lift every voice and sing, my friends. Sing again and again and again, because we don't know when the music will end. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Reverend.
you.
Reverend, so excited.
Thank you.
We want you to share whatever is on your heart now, sir. We're going to take some questions later, but you've been in this fight for a long time, and you've seen your community transform and change in Greenville. Can you share a little bit about the transformation that you've seen and how action has taken you to that place?
While I didn't grow up in Greenville physically, I think I grew up professionally, career-wise, here in this community that afforded me an opportunity to serve as pastor, the third pastor in the 113-year history of Mountain View Baptist Church in this Newtown community. And I've watched it change. You're exactly right, Eli. I watched Main Street Greenville go from one lane in either direction, from 2 lanes in either direction to now 1 lane with slanted parks instead of parallel parking. And with that, I also have sadly watched strong neighborhoods that were once populated by people of color nearly go away. And so what we're watching happen here in Southern Side and in Newtown in particular is a reclaiming of the community. We're watching where right outside the doors of this church where I serve, there were 400 to 500 families that lived here in shanty style, duplex, quadruplexes. Now there are less than 10 families that live in this neighborhood. But what we're excited about is Mountain View was able to use cooperative economics from what we know the church to be able to do. Putting nickels and dimes and quarters together. And we purchased more than 30 lots around our church. And we're excited to see a community come back again, thriving and once again providing a vibrant community for people to live in. And we're in the shadow of Unity Park, but we're not shadowed by anything. So I'm very happy about this opportunity and excited about what this community is able to do. And leaders like Reverend Flemming and Mrs. Flemming, who for years, Mrs. Flemming, more than 4 decades now in public service, has been able to champion the cause of a people. And I am so happy to be able to share and help do some of that lifting in this community, Eli. Thanks for that question.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Pastor Mills? I can ask questions all day, y'all, so I'm going to mute myself. And please do, because we're very fortunate to have him in his time here. And he's very knowledgeable on so many different issues.
Thank you, Eli. I'm humbled by that. Thank you so much.
Well, I wanted to ask one question again. When you made that transition to take over the Greenville campus at USC Upstate, what are some of the challenges that you see for Greenvillians, especially folks of color, making that transition to the next level, to push their education into higher ed?
What I think, Eli, and that's a great question. What excites me about this region is all of the economic opportunities, the industrial presence of headquarters of corporations that give people an opportunity to have jobs. But if you're not trained for those jobs, then those jobs go to other people. And so they're having to bring staff from other parts of the country and even the world to work in this community, which is a great opportunity to diversify this community and continue to expand on the diversity. But there are people who live here, who grew up here, who need to have access to specific training to access those jobs that are in this community. And I think USC Upstate, in partnership with Greenville Technical College, which more than 30 years we have been in that direct connect program, opportunities for people to go get their 2 years of education at Greenville Tech, earn a certificate or an associate's degree, and transfer seamlessly into a baccalaureate program at USC Upstate, gain their 2 more years and get a 4-year degree, and then qualify for white collar jobs. I really think that this region holds many opportunities for people to move up that economic ladder, to change the course of their families generationally. And some of the challenges are being able to articulate that, get it out there in the public where people are living, and reminding them that they can have access to quality, affordable education right here in this community. Not every student is going to go down the road to Clemson. That's an R1 school. There is room still in the community for regional accredited comprehensive universities like USC Upstate. And so our message is strong to Main Street America. Education is a path out of poverty and upward on that economic ladder for mobility. So I'm excited about what we're able to do at USC Upstate. A degree changes not only the student that's studying, but for first generation college students, it changes the trajectory for entire families. Just ask a first generation nursing student that graduates, earns their certification as a state licensed nurse in South Carolina, passes their state boards, and has a job offer before they even get that white jacket and walk across the stage at USC Upstate. it immediately changes their economic contribution to our community. And we get to watch that twice a year at graduation in spring and fall. It's happening. USC Upstate contributes more than $15 million in an economic impact in this community because more than 80% of our graduates remain in this community to raise their families. My family's one example of that.
That is beautiful, that last part, especially because you're building leaders that care about this place and will continue to care with that knowledge. We have some other great questions from Susan Reardon asks, what is the church, and I know you don't speak for all churches, but your church specifically, what are you doing for COVID to support COVID with the knowledge for your parishioners and the vaccine efforts? How are you communicating that information?
That's a great question, Susan. And what we've been able to do at Mountain View, and again, you're right, Eli, I can't speak for all churches, but I can speak about the power of the network of the church. The church has always been a place where a message can get out very quickly. If you don't believe me, just tell something in a missionary circle that you want to get out. It's going to get out. It's going to move through prayer circles. People are going to share that information. But what we've been able to do specifically at our church, we partnered with DHEC to have a COVID-19 testing site on our property. We realized that, churches have not been able to gather in their traditional historic means, but our facilities are great places to have information in partnership with some of our state agencies. So we specifically had a COVID testing site on a Saturday morning. Our parking lot and the street just lend itself great to a drive-through, and we had more than 200 community residents, not just Mountain View members, but this went out into the Southern Side community. All of our networks and platforms, social media platforms, we shared that, and people were able to come and get tested. Beyond that, specifically within the operations of Mountain View, we have a wonderful health ministry at our church led by one of our nursing faculty, who is DNP, and she keeps our congregation informed. So weekly, we're pushing out information on all of our social media platforms. My daughter is working at the COVID vaccine clinic at the old Kmart. So she has been getting information out herself as a young person. We have a member of our church who is working to get people registered via phone. And I personally have driven some people over who didn't have a way to get to their shots, opportunity to get to their appointment for a shot. There's a number of things that churches can do using their facilities, their vans, their people who are working from home can help get the message out. And Eli, what's really critical is getting those disenfranchised people, folks who don't use the technology that we have. Like I have an iPhone, I have an iWatch, I have an iPad, but older generations don't have that. So this is an excellent opportunity to bridge the gap of generations, get young people to connect with older people, get them registered if they are so inclined to have that shot. And then we could use our mechanisms to get people physically picked up and taken to the place where they need to go. And I know that's happening at other churches. You mentioned Pastor Speed as a great leader in our community. I know that they're doing great work at Allen Temple with the healthcare professionals that are members of their church, Long Branch, others I could name that are engaged in all of this work as well.
Thank you.
Can I say
Yes,
something? In March, both Prisma and Bon Secure are holding mobile clinics at several of the churches. They pick the areas that have the highest number of people not getting vaccinated. And one of those areas is an area that I serve right near Mountain View on the other side, near the West Greenville, where there's a large Black and Hispanic population. So they will be coming there in March. And there are other places that they will be moving to. And we're trying to get them to the point where the next stop will be the mobile units that will be going to houses for those people who are invalids, who are not in nursing homes, etc. So yes, we appreciate Mountain View, and I'm sure they'll be on the list where the mobile vehicles will come, because too many people do not have transportation.
Thank you for that, Councilwoman. And I know you are the reason that Prisma got involved. We know your tenacity and commitment to serving people that don't always have a voice that is listened to. So thank you for that. And Pastor Mills, I did want to, we had an awesome question, something why I respect you so much, from our former chairwoman, amazing chairwoman, Kate Franch. One of your advocacy issues is environmental equity. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing there and why that's something that you're passionate about?
Thank you so much for that question. And again, much of that work is entwined with the work of the Honorable Lillian Brock Flemming, but it's sort of like a Jordan and Pippen, if you would allow me that analogy. If she'll toss the ball, we'll carry it to the hoop. And she has been providing the ball of information for this community for a number of years. It's up to us to engage with whatever skill sets we have, so that she is not worn out doing this work by herself. And so once we found out about the environmental issue impacting this community in particular, there is a coal ash spill into the Reedy that has contaminated property behind Mountain View Baptist Church. And so we have partnered with DHEC and with CSX Railroad, who owns most of that property, and with Duke Energy for an appropriate analysis of soil. I was on a meeting yesterday. New soil sampling sites are being identified, also with some deeper wells that will allow samples to go from shallow to deep, to check the soil, to know whether there has been any contamination that affects where people live. And Black and brown communities tend to be overlooked when it comes to these issues of environment and environmental justice in particular. Our community, right at the end of this street where Mountain View is, Cagle Street, there's the sanitation and facility, and there was a smokestack that still exists where trash and refuse was burned in this community. I hear the stories of members of this church who remember that their mothers didn't hang their clothes out at certain times because either from the smoke from the locomotives, the engines that flanked this community by the railroad, and this smokestack where garbage was being burned, we literally are the other side of the tracks. And so sometimes people forget that people live here. And so the policies that affect Black and brown communities as it relates to their environment has never been more important than in what I think is a very civilized, advanced society that has access to all of this technology, but yet our environments are still contaminated. There's policy that affects that. And so we have to uncover and shed the light on those policies and inform the community. These pews are empty behind me right now, but last year they were full when we had a meeting of the community informing everyone of this situation in our community. And I'll say the last thing on this, I'm very passionate about this, is make cleanup equal, make it balanced. Don't clean up on one side of town, which in this case, McDaniel Avenue and Broad Street has a wonderful example of how cleanup can happen. But when it comes to Cagle and Temple Street, we still are struggling to figure out how to do it. There shouldn't be a delay in the why this needs to happen. It needs to happen yesterday. We just need to put the pressure on and make it happen. And I believe we're on the right track for that. Sister Flemming, I call her that. She's a member of this church, grew up in this church, and her mother was a leader in this church. And that same tenacity still echoes in the halls of this church. And we have to make people aware that if we don't speak up, if we don't lift the voices, like I said a few moments ago, then the policies will go unchanged. So thank you for that question.
Well, Pastor Mills, it is always, like I said, I am ready to go and work in the community. Your passion, you can feel that through the Zoom, which you can, that happens very rarely, but I'm just so honored that you took the time on behalf of all the Democrats here in Greenville. We hope to continue to see success from you, from your church and the public leadership and the community service that you've been given. So thank you, and let us know how we can support the work that you're doing, because we want to, and I want to.
Thank you so much, Eli. I was a little nervous about how we would come through on Zoom, presenting such a, what I think is an important message. I want to commend the party and all of those who are working. Don't lose hope. I saw in our community a galvanizing effort to try to change the tide. I believe we can do that. We just need to get out, mobilize, bridge the gap, engage those generations of X, Y, Z, and bring the boomers together, because it can happen. Don't neglect any pocket of our society. We must make a change in our community, state level and nationally. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. That was incredible. That was incredible. As always, we are very fortunate to have some of our elected officials here, and I see two that are always so accessible. And I'm going to start with Ms. Glenda Morrison Fair, who represents us so eloquently and beautifully on the school board. Thank you for what you do, and please share with us anything that's on your mind, ma'am.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Eli, I too am so excited. I'm like you. When Pastor Mills speak, I'm ready to get up and go. But I really want to tell the Democratic Party this morning, education is more than just sitting in a classroom. This was education at its best this morning. I hope this is being recorded, because it needs to be shared with all of the community, especially our young people. But Pastor Mills, the Flemming duo, I don't want to leave them out. And of course, Dr. Bingham has given such great information. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. Whatever I can do to support the program, I won't go back over the information again, but it was unbelievable, especially the last part that was included about our environmental issues, which are issues a lot of times our community overlooks. And that's almost the basis for a successful community. People just overlook that. So I can't say enough about you, your team, Kate, and everybody on your team this morning, that this Zoom has been excellent. Thank you, community. Thank you for your support. And next month, I look to see something just as in the realm of excellence. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for everything, Ms. Glenda. So positive and again, accessible. Our elected officials need to be accessible, and that's one thing you can always say about Ms. Glenda. And now I have the honor of introducing our newly announced city councilwoman, who just announced her re-election campaign earlier this week. Miss Lillian Brock Flemming has served for over 40 years, and we'll be doing a celebration this summer to ring in the 40 years. So I will give the floor over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've already talked enough, but all of there's very little to say. All of you have worked very closely, and I really do appreciate my pastor, my husband, and all of the members of the Democratic Black Caucus, the Democratic Women, the Democratic Party, for just holding on and continuing to work. We can do this. We can do this. There are so many young people who were not elected in 2020 that can be elected in 2021 and 2022, and we can do this as long as we just hold up, stay faithful, and with the NAACP, like the other, they're already beginning to work on voter registration. We heard the Black Caucus is doing the same thing. We've got to do that, because there's still people who are not in the system, and we got to do that. This morning, we've had our inspiration. We've had information, several sermons, and so from people. So we just need to just hold on and just be ready to work. God is so good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, he is, Miss Lillian. Thank you. I mentioned Ruth Todd, but we also have our other amazing team members, Sharon Garrett and Jonathan Sweeney. And Pastor Mills, I'm going to ask Jonathan. He wanted to ask you a question. And Jonathan does not know I'm going to say this. I want to see Jonathan as our chair someday. I want to see Jonathan as our senator someday or a representative.
Amen.
So, y'all get used to the because he's going to be around for a while.
Yes.
Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eli, for that big setup. I promise y'all I didn't pay Eli to say that. But good morning to everyone. I'm just so overjoyed, like everyone else has said, about seeing all of your beautiful faces and just really hearing this inspirational and educational, panel this morning. But I did want to ask Pastor Mills a question, and it was so good to see you, Pastor Mills, as always. I've known you for quite a while, so it's always good when I get a chance to see you. But I just wanted to allude to what I was reading earlier when I began to log on. I didn't even realize that you were on the Citizens Advisory Panel for the city. And so one point that I wanted to touch on, and I wanted to get your opinion on, is obviously we have seen many instances over many years where there have been police shootings of unarmed citizens, and particularly Black citizens. And so as the third vice chair, I know that's a huge issue for young folks, not just of color, but just young folks in general, about police violence against our citizens. And so I remember when the George Floyd protests and things like that were going on, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, there were a lot of my Caucasian friends or brothers and sisters that reached out and said, Jonathan, we feel your pain. We want to help. We just don't know how. What can we do? How can we step in to prevent something like what happened in Kenosha, what happened in Minneapolis, from happening here in Greenville? And so my question to you, Pastor Mills, is how would you advise not just Caucasian folks that want to step in, but the community at large to step in and be that advisory, an advisory citizenry to the law enforcement here?
Again, thank you, Jonathan. It is great to see you and great to engage with you. And thank you for that question. I want to first begin by commending Greenville City Council and our mayor and leadership for having the foresight to call us together, lay people, to review policy that govern public safety in this community. And you might know that just this week, the first reading of a proposal that came from the recommendations of this panel, Citizens Review Panel, for the automation of body-worn cameras. When an officer draws his weapon or her weapon, they automatically activate the body-worn camera. Up until this point, the cameras were only activated automatically if the sirens were turned on the car and if a taser was pulled and armed. So we thought that if the technology was available for those two instances, then surely if the most deadly piece of weaponry that the officer had should be able to cause an automation operation for the cameras as well. So I want to commend City Council, Lillian Flemming, again for that. That is very important. And I will say that it takes all of us paying attention to what's happening in our community, not dismissing when someone feels like their rights have been violated, whether that is as dramatic as police violence or something, an unlawful stop, or being mistreated or profiled. I have two sons that we've had to have that conversation with. I'll never forget the first time my son, and I get a little bit emotional thinking about that, him driving home. My oldest son, who's now a West Point cadet, a student here in Greenville County Schools, was student body president at J.L. Mann High School, was out working during that. Everybody knows about Spirit Week in Greenville County, and he was leading Spirit Week for J.L. Mann versus Greenville High, which his younger brother is now a freshman at Greenville High. So we have a permanent rivalry in our household. But our son was driving home, and he called me. And he said, "Dad, I'm being pulled over by the police. What do I do?" And I said, "Son, keep me on the phone, put me on speaker, and put the phone on the seat, and keep your hands where the officer can see them." And the officer treated him very well, with great respect, and advised him that his tail light was out and that he needed to get home safely. I think about the Ahmaud Arbery's, the Philando Castiles, the George Floyd's, whose encounters were less humane than my son. And so I apologize for that, but a very sobering moment for my family, that at any moment it could be any of us. And I think that we have to stop ignoring these truths. I want to also commend just this week, and it's unfortunate that an officer's been arrested, but just yesterday, based on investigation and the leadership of Tracy Fant in this community, drawing attention to an unjust and unlawful arrest. That wrong has been righted and the process has begun. And I think we have to continue, as I've said this morning, lifting our voices. We must educate ourselves and challenge these ideas that have been wrongly characterizing people of color in our community. It's unfair, that we should be looked at suspiciously without there being any just cause for that. So I think we have the opportunity just to build bridges. I think this is the party of the people. I think it's the party of all people, and we have the opportunity to build bridges, increase our networks, invite people to the table. Just because we disagree on issues doesn't mean we have to be disagreeable, and we can join our hands together, and we can be present at city council meetings, county council meetings. Anytime policy is being debated or discussed, we should be there, do our homework, research, and speak up when it's our turn to speak up. Sorry to be so long on that, Jonathan, but I appreciate you asking that question.
Reverend Mills, you were not too long. And Jonathan, one of the things that people don't realize, the only two accredited law enforcement agencies in Greenville County is the Greenville County Sheriff and the City of Greenville. But you got Fountain Inn, you got Greer, you got Malden, you got Simpsonville, you got Travelers Rest. That's all over the state of South Carolina. The majority, if I'm not mistaken, is only about 8 accredited law enforcement agencies, which means they don't have to follow any rules and regulations. And who goes to the Fountain Inn, to the Malden, to the Simpsonville, to the Travelers Rest City Council? And we're sitting there at City Hall, people come to us and we have the stuff. And we're working with the policies, as Reverend Mills says, we couldn't go another step without changing the policies, because they have some policies written to say they can do what they want to do and get away with it. Now, if we as a council did not change those policies, we wouldn't have these situations. Well, who's changing the policies at the other places? If this county, the people on this vision can talk to other people. Somebody lives in Fountain, somebody lives in Travelers Rest, somebody lives in Greer, Simpsonville, Malden. Somebody needs to change those policies and regulations, and that should be state law. All of them need to be accredited. All doctors have to have a license. Law enforcement, you shouldn't have a gun. and not have accreditation, because that's the reason why people are getting killed, because they're in unaccredited situations. But anyway, I'm so sorry about that. But the young people need to know that's where you work on it. The other thing is we need you in law enforcement, because we need intelligent people in law enforcement. That we cannot allow them to continue to say that law enforcement, all of them kill. All of them do not. You get one or two in there and they kill it for everybody else. We have wonderful law enforcement agencies and wonderful people in there. So we need to get our young people, let them go to USC, has a wonderful law enforcement degree that you can get. Oh, and you can go into research, investigation, and stop some of these pro-racial profilings and everything else in policies. We need you there. So I've had my second sermon for the day. That's it.
No, Miss.
Excellent point.
We always love you.
May I add, Eli, just really quick, that she makes a great point. And if a officer is terminated in Greenville and they go to apply for a job at one of those unaccredited municipal areas, they can get a job there. And you know, if I'm a CWP holder, and the investigation into my background to give me that license or CWP is more strenuous than hiring a law enforcement agent in those unaccredited municipalities. Something's got to change with that.
No, thank you both. Miss Lillian, you can give a sermon anytime, because like Reverend Mills, you know how I feel about you and how you inspire us. And one thing I think is a great parallel is the work that you did in the county, in the schools. You recruited African-American teachers because you knew that made a difference. And I do think that point you just made, we have to make that emphasis on a county-wide level to recruit from every diverse background so that people can see the reflection in law enforcement. So I think that was a really great point you made. Jonathan, thank you for that question. And Pastor Mills, thank you again. This was inspiring. Y'all, I can stay on forever, but I know we have to say our farewell. I want to leave you with something that I really, really, really believe in. My mom has shared with me so many great little nuggets of wisdom. And one of the things that she shared with me was a poet and a mystic named Rumi. And I had this before Pastor Mills even said this. This was kind of what I wanted everyone to leave with. And the words are really important, but the sentiment is more important. And the quote is, "Raise your words, not your voice. It is the rain that grows flowers, not thunder." And I don't mean not to raise your voice and to be loud and not say what you mean, but I think what we've seen here is when we elevate the right words, when we talk about policy, when we talk about our community, we're able to uplift and really change minds and hearts of people. So I want to leave you all with that, and I hope you have a great, great Saturday and a great March coming up. Thank you all so much. Thanks to my team. Thank you to everyone that came on, and we will be seeing you all soon. Bye.